Nietzsche's most dangerous idea wasn't that God is dead, it was what he believed would replace him. He saw it coming before anyone else, and he didn't celebrate it, he warned us. In the late 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote the words that would echo through the next 2 centuries. God is dead, and we have killed him. But most people misunderstand what he meant. Nietzsche wasn't mocking religion. He wasn't rejoicing, he was terrified. What he saw was a slow spiritual collapse, not just in churches, but in civilization itself. Today we'll explore Nietzsche's darkest prophecy, what happens to a society when it loses its highest values, and what he believed would take their place. Because when Nietzsche declared the death of God, he wasn't talking about theology. He was diagnosing a disease of meaning, and what he predicted next is already happening. In 1882, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote a parable that many dismissed as poetic madness, but like all true prophecy, its truth has only sharpened with time. In The Gay Science, a madman storms into a marketplace at noon, lantern in hand, crying, "God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him." The people laugh, not because they disagree, but because they no longer care. That's the horror Nietzsche saw, not the rebellion of atheists, but the indifference of a civilization that had unknowingly severed its root system. Not just belief in a bearded sky deity, but belief in anything transcendent, anything higher than profit, pleasure, or personal opinion. When Nietzsche said God is dead, he wasn't being metaphorical, he was being diagnostic. He saw that the West had emptied its cathedrals of God, but still wanted to cling to the morality he had built, still wanted justice without judgment, meaning without metaphysics, rights without responsibility. But Nietzsche understood something modern society still refuses to admit. If you destroy the source of value, the value does not survive. You can't keep the fruits once you burn the tree. Look around, we live in the shadow of that death. We try to patch the hole with therapy apps, political crusades, curated identities, but the ache returns. We laugh like the townspeople, but deep down, we know something irreversible has happened. Nietzsche wasn't celebrating, he was warning. And most terrifying of all, he said, this deed is still more distant from them than the most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. We didn't just inherit a dead God, we inherited his silence. And now we must answer a question our ancestors never had to face. What fills the space where the sacred used to be? Nietzsche didn't fear the death of God because it ended religion. He feared it because it ended meaning. He saw what most people didn't, that belief wasn't merely about worship or doctrine. It was a structure, a moral architecture, a spine that held the weight of Western civilization. And when it collapsed, nothing would automatically rise to replace it. He called this condition nihilism, not just disbelief, but a deeper, more corrosive spiritual collapse. Nihilism is what happens when the universe no longer whispers back. It's not loud or dramatic. It doesn't come with fire and brimstone. It comes quietly in the form of boredom, burnout, and sleepless scrolling. It asks a single devastating question: what's the point? And it never offers an answer. Nietzsche warned, when one gives up the Christian faith, one pulls the right to Christian morality out from under one's feet. In other words, you can't keep the fruits when you've uprooted the tree. You can't talk about human rights, dignity, or objective justice if you've removed the foundation that made those things sacred. Morality becomes branding, ethics become trends, people become content. And the signs are everywhere. A generation medicated not just for anxiety but for existential disorientation. Social media feeds filled with performance but devoid of presence. A cultural obsession with identity that masks the absence of essence. Meaning, once inherited, must now be manufactured, and the machinery isn't working. This isn't a crisis of belief, it's a crisis of being. And Nietzsche saw it coming, because when God dies, the soul doesn't die with him. It starves, and when it starves, it clings, desperately, to whatever promises to fill the void: ideology, rage, aesthetics, addiction. We have killed the sacred, but we have not yet replaced it. The question now is whether we'll surrender to the nothingness or dare to build something worthy in its place. Not everyone reacts to the death of God in the same way. Some deny it, some flee from it. A few, very few, face it. Nietzsche understood that when the sacred collapses, it doesn't create unity, it creates divergence. Different people take different paths through the ruins, and today we can see them clearly, walking around us, reflected in culture, in politics, even in ourselves. There are three main types of people living in the shadow of a dead God. Chances are you'll see a part of yourself in at least one of them. 1. The hollow believer. This is the person who still uses the old language, but with no fire behind the words. They go to church, they post about morality, they quote scripture or spiritual cliches, but it's ritual, not revelation. It's inherited belief without interior conviction. Nietzsche called this slave morality, a passive clinging to old codes without the courage to admit they no longer move you. The hollow believer doesn't actually believe, they perform belief, because confronting the void is too terrifying. And so they stay inside the collapsed cathedral, pretending the roof still holds. You'll find this person in the cultural Christian, the good vibes only, spiritualist, or the activist who demands justice but cannot define why human life has value. They still use sacred words, purpose, kindness, truth, but the words are hollowed out, like corpses dressed in holy robes. 2. The lost rebel. If the hollow believer clings to dead structures, the lost rebel burns them down, but builds nothing in their place. This is the modern nihilist, the ironic, detached, terminally online wanderer. They reject all values as lies, all meaning as manipulation, all systems as control. They see through everything but believe in nothing. And while they may seem strong, it's often just armor around a spiritual wound. This person lives on Twitter threads, Reddit forums, or buried in black pill YouTube videos. They might identify as spiritually agnostic, ex-angelical, recovering Catholic, or post-everything. They can deconstruct with precision, but have no tools to reconstruct. Nietzsche saw this too. He called them the last men beings who live only for comfort, distraction, and irony. No suffering, no sacrifice, no greatness, just endless scrolling. 3. The creator. Then there is the rare third type, the one Nietzsche believed the future depends on. The creator does not flee the void. They stand at its edge and say, if nothing is given meaning, then I will give meaning. This is the path of the Übermensch, not someone who dominates others, but someone who takes radical responsibility for their own soul. They don't rely on inherited values. They forge their own. They build rituals, write their own codes, and live in alignment with something they've bled to discover. They're not always loud, often they're invisible, but you'll know them by the quiet integrity they carry in every room they enter. These are the people who, in a post-God world, become artists, mystics, healers, warriors, not for fame but because they must, because they cannot unsee the truth and refuse to live in denial. So which one are you? The hollow believer, repeating what no longer resonates? The lost rebel, brilliant at critique but allergic to commitment? Or the creator, trembling at the void but building anyway? This isn't a judgment, it's an invitation. Because Nietzsche didn't just diagnose the collapse, he challenged us to respond. Nietzsche didn't just write about the abyss, he lived in it. Behind the sharp aphorisms and searing critiques was a man slowly unraveling. A child raised in a devout Lutheran family, Nietzsche lost his father, a pastor, when he was just 5 years old. The trauma carved something deep into him, a wound where faith once lived. He would later call Christianity a slave morality, yet the ghost of it never quite left him. You don't write with such intensity about God unless you once needed him. As Nietzsche's ideas grew darker, so did his life. He lived in isolation, wandering through Europe in physical agony from chronic illness and mental exhaustion. Friends abandoned him. Academia dismissed him. He spent most of his adult life on the fringes, unpublished, misunderstood, nearly destitute. He was a prophet speaking to a deaf world. Then, in 1889, it happened. Nietzsche saw a horse being beaten in the streets of Turin. He ran toward it, wrapped his arms around the animal, and collapsed. He never recovered. From that day forward, Nietzsche lost all coherence. He signed letters as Dionysus and the Crucified. He wandered in and out of silence, cared for by his sister until his death in 1900. Was it madness? Or was it the price of perceiving too much? Carl Jung believed Nietzsche became a victim of his own superior perception, a mind that could dismantle the world's illusions but couldn't emotionally survive the wreckage. He gazed into the abyss without a psychological container to hold what stared back, and in this, Nietzsche became the first casualty of the world he prophesied, a world without God, without meaning, and without rest. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the human soul. When Nietzsche declared God dead, he didn't believe people would remain in a neutral, empty space. He knew something else would rush in to fill the void, because once the sacred is gone, the hunger doesn't disappear, it mutates. The 20th century proved him right, violently. Where once there were cathedrals, there came ideologies, fascism, communism, nationalism, each offering a total vision of the world, complete with new gods, rituals, enemies, and salvation stories. These systems didn't just govern economies, they governed souls. They filled the vacuum of meaning with the machinery of obedience. When the transcendent is lost, the political becomes religious. But even after those systems collapsed, the void remained, and new idols emerged. Today, in the 21st century, we don't pledge allegiance to political cults as much as we do to algorithms. We follow influencers instead of prophets, binge content instead of contemplating truth, and curate identities like fashion brands. What once required sacrifice, we now simulate with subscriptions. Purpose has become a product. Need meaning? Sign up for a masterclass, buy a self-help book, join a lifestyle brand. The spiritual hunger is monetized, sterilized, and sold back to you with a 30-day refund policy. And identity? That's theater. It's not discovered through suffering. It's assembled through hashtags, bios, aesthetics. But what we gain in appearance, we lose in authenticity. We perform who we are, but rarely become it. Nietzsche warned that if we didn't replace God with something worthy, we'd fall prey to what he called decadence, a slow spiritual rot masked by surface-level progress. And that's exactly what we see now, a society that looks vibrant but feels empty, hyperconnected but profoundly alone. We don't live without gods, we just create cheaper ones. And every false replacement, every ideology, every identity, every dopamine-fueled distraction is a desperate attempt to avoid asking the most dangerous question: what if nothing is meaningful unless I make it so? Nietzsche never offered a step-by-step guide to surviving the death of God, but embedded within his writings is a hidden roadmap, a kind of psychological alchemy. Because once the divine collapses, you don't just lose belief, you lose orientation. You must undergo a transformation, or you'll drown in the silence that remains. This transformation unfolds in 4 brutal, necessary stages. Most never make it past the second. The first stage is collapse. This is when the old system, religion, ideology, inherited values, suddenly shatters. You may have grown up reciting sacred texts, saluting flags, or believing in progress. Then one day something breaks. A betrayal, a death, a philosophical realization, and everything that once felt eternal becomes artificial. This is existential whiplash. You realize, I don't know what's true anymore. That's not rebellion, that's grief. After the shock comes the abyss. This stage isn't loud, it's quiet, deadly quiet. You stop pretending, you stop praying, you stop hoping, and in the silence, a dark numbness sets in. Some call it depression, others call it burnout, fatigue, or nihilism. But really, it's spiritual starvation. The soul, now godless, begins to disintegrate. This is where many settle, into quiet despair or comfortable distraction. But for some, numbness turns to rage. The third stage is revolt, a violent overcorrection. When traditional meaning fails, people often throw themselves into new creeds: political extremism, tribal identity, conspiracy, or cult-like activism, anything to feel purpose again. But these replacements are shallow echoes of the sacred. They offer certainty, not depth, order, not wisdom, and they demand allegiance, not inner transformation. This is where people get stuck, mistaking noise for meaning. The rarest stage is also the most courageous: creation. Here, you stop outsourcing meaning. You stop worshiping borrowed gods. Instead, you begin the hard work of becoming. You write your own values. You craft rituals that reflect your truth. You live as if your life were a work of art, because it is. This is the path of the Übermensch, the one who creates value not through illusion, but through authenticity. It's not easy, it's lonely, but it's real. So ask yourself, which stage are you in right now? Still mourning the collapse? Numb in the void? Caught in ideological fire? Or quietly beginning to build? Wherever you are, just remember, Nietzsche never said meaning was gone. He said it was no longer given. Now it must be forged. Nietzsche did not leave us with a void and nothing more. Amid the ruins of dead gods and collapsing values, he planted a dangerous seed, a vision of a new kind of human. He called it the Übermensch, often translated as the overman or superman, though both terms fail to capture the depth of what he meant. The Übermensch is not a tyrant. He is not a ruler. He is not superior by birth or wealth or status. He is superior because he creates meaning where none is given. This is not mere rebellion, it is creation. The Übermensch does not believe in inherited morality. He does not cling to outdated systems or replace them with shiny new dogmas. He stares into the abyss and does not look away. He doesn't run, he doesn't numb himself. Instead, he builds. Not illusions, but values, forged in the fire of personal confrontation with meaninglessness. What are the traits of such a human? First, radical honesty. The Übermensch does not lie to himself to sleep at night. He doesn't pretend life has purpose. He carves purpose into life with every act, every choice. He doesn't believe in salvation, he believes in responsibility. Second, existential courage. To wake up without external meaning and still act with integrity is the rarest form of bravery. The Übermensch embraces suffering, not masochistically, but as raw material for transformation. As Nietzsche wrote, one must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. Third, creative sovereignty. The Übermensch is an artist, not necessarily with paint or music, but with life itself. He is not shaped by the world. He shapes himself, and, in doing so, challenges the world to rise. And how do you walk this path? Begin with solitude, not loneliness, but intentional silence. Turn off the noise. Let the artificial gods fall. In that quiet, write daily. Define your own values, not what your culture says, not what your parents said, but what you know in your bones to be right. Read Marcus Aurelius, read Viktor Frankl, study Carl Jung, not to follow them, but to remember that others have faced the void and returned with fire. The Übermensch is not a goal, he is a direction. And if God is dead, then this path, the path of creation, courage, and conscious meaning, is the only one left that does not lead to despair. The path to the Übermensch is not just rare, it's perilous, because most who begin the journey never complete it. They get stuck in the in-between. They shed the old gods, but never fully embody the new self. This is the liminal space where transformation mutates into illusion. Nietzsche warned about this. He knew that rejecting meaning without recreating it doesn't make you enlightened, it makes you vulnerable. And the most common danger is inflation. The inflation trap seduces those who see through the lies and imagine that this vision makes them superior. They reject religion, politics, or mainstream morality, and then build a new ego around their deconstructed identity. They mistake critique for creation. You'll hear them speak with contempt. I'm more awake than everyone else. But that's not consciousness, that's spiritual arrogance. Then there's the withdrawal trap. This is where the seeker, exhausted by the collapse of meaning, retreats into detachment. They call it inner peace, but it's often numbness wearing a spiritual mask. They stop participating in life, believing themselves above it. But withdrawal is not transcendence, it's fear with better branding. Finally, there's the savior complex, the one who sees the collapse and feels compelled to fix everyone else. They become preachers of postmodern wisdom, trying to pull others from the void while ignoring their own shadow. But transformation doesn't begin with others, it begins inside. Slow, silent, unglamorous. The Übermensch doesn't evangelize, he embodies. He doesn't demand the world awaken, he walks awake among the sleeping and lets his life speak. The danger isn't that you won't begin the journey, the danger is that you'll stop halfway and call it enlightenment. Nietzsche didn't kill God, he simply held up the mirror and showed us what we had already done. He wasn't celebrating the collapse. He was mourning what would come after, a culture that had forgotten how to kneel, yet still longed for something worth kneeling to, a civilization without gods, without purpose, without direction, adrift in infinite freedom with no compass. But he also left a warning laced with challenge. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. If God is dead, then the burden of meaning no longer belongs to priests, kings, or ideologies. It belongs to you. That's terrifying, but also liberating. The question is no longer, what should I believe? The question is, what can I build that is worthy of belief? We don't need more prophets. We need witnesses of consciousness, people who look directly into the abyss and, instead of falling, build a bridge across it. So if there is no longer divine law, then your life is the law you write in fire. Which of the three types spoke to you most? The hollow believer, the lost rebel, or the creator? Have you felt the death of meaning in your own life? Tell me in the comments. And if you're ready to dive deeper into Nietzsche's most dangerous and most transformative ideas, watch this next.